All right, good afternoon. Couple programming notes. In a short while, I will be joined by Daniel Peter Endres, who is the humanitarian coordinator at Interim in Kabul, in Afghanistan. He will bring you up to date about everything that the UN is doing to help the people so severely impacted by the earthquake in that country. At 1 p.m., we will have Juliette Touma, who is the spokesperson for UNRWA. She will be briefing you from Amman on the latest developments in Gaza and everything that UNRWA is trying to do. And just note at 11 a.m. tomorrow, there'll be a briefing here by Siobhan Mulally, the Special Rapporteur on Trafficking in Persons, especially women and children. I have a travel announcement for the Secretary General for a trip that has been planned a long time ago. He is on his way to Beijing in China. At the invitation of the Chinese government, he will take part in the third Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation and is scheduled to deliver remarks during the forum's opening ceremony, as well as another high-level session on climate. While there, he is scheduled to have bilateral meetings with President Xi Jinping, Vice President Han Zheng, and other senior officials, including the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Wang Yi, and the Special Envoy for Climate change, Xi Jinhua. The Secretary General will discuss a variety of issues with his Chinese interlocutors. Onwards travel of the Secretary General will be announced in due course. You saw that yesterday the Secretary General said that we are on the verge of the abyss in the Middle East. It was his duty to make two strong humanitarian appeals. To Hamas, he said, the hostages must be immediately released without any conditions. To Israel, he said that rapid and unimpeded access for humanitarian aid must be granted for humanitarian supplies and workers for the sake of civilians in Gaza. Mr. Guterres said that each of these two objectives are valid in themselves. They should not become bargaining chips, and they must be implemented because it is the right thing to do. Martin Griffiths, Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, will be heading to Cairo, Egypt. He'll leave tomorrow for a mission that is expected to last a number of days. He's also plans to visit Israel. He said this morning that we're living in the worst of times. Mr. Griffiths said the taking of hostages, including women, children, the elderly, and the ill, is unacceptable and illegal, calling for their immediate release. He also stressed that people must be able to move out of harm's way with assistance, and they must go to safer areas and have their needs met. The UN agencies have supplies ready to move into southern Gaza to meet surging humanitarian needs. It is critical that life-saving assistance is allowed to move through Rafah crossing without delay. A plane load of supplies from the World Health Organization arrived at Al Arish airport in Egypt. That is the airport that is closest to the Rafah crossing. For its part, the World Food Programme has plans to reach 225,000 displaced people in 19 UN shelters throughout Gaza. I will leave it to Juliette Touma to give you all of the operational details regarding UNRWA and all of the work they've been doing. Moving north, our colleagues at the UN Interim Force in Lebanon, UNIFIL, report that the situation in southern Lebanon remains tense with renewed shelling this afternoon, Lebanese time. Yesterday, the mission observed intense exchanges of fire in several areas along the Blue Line, one of which hit UNIFIL's headquarters in Nakora. Fortunately, no one was hurt. The mission reminds all parties involved about the need to respect the neutrality and inviolability of United Nations premises at all times. Peacekeepers continue to do their essential work, including through patrolling along the Blue Line. UNIFIL's leadership, led by the head of mission, Force Commander Major General Haroldo Lazaro Sainz, remains engaged with authorities on both sides of the Blue Line in his efforts to de-escalate the situation and to prevent any further loss of life. Staying on peacekeeping, the peacekeeping mission in Mali, MINUSMA, announced that today it started withdrawing troops from northern camps in the Kidal region, starting with bases in Tessalit and Aguelok. This will be followed by the Kidal camp itself. The mission is doing everything it can to complete this process as soon as possible in the midst of a rapidly deteriorating security situation, and also in light of the increased risk to the lives of hundreds of peacekeepers. This is becoming increasingly difficult. Today, personnel from the mission were forced to seek shelter in bunkers due to an exchange of fire in Tessalit. All parties, including the government, including the signatories, armed movements, have an obligation to ensure the secure, safe, and unimpeded withdrawal of the mission's personnel and equipment. And as you will have seen over the weekend, we issued a note saying that the heightened tensions in the northern part of Mali are increasing the likelihood that the mission will be forced to depart without being able to repatriate equipment belonging to troop-contributing countries and the UN. In light of this, the mission has intensified engagement with the Malian authorities to convey its concerns and underscore their responsibility as host nation for the safety and security of peacekeepers. The UN Secretariat is also engaging in intense consultations with members of the Security Council and troop-contributing countries to seek their support for the safety of peacekeepers. And this weekend in Sudan, we mark a grave milestone in the ongoing fighting there. 6 months have passed since the hostilities erupted. In a statement issued yesterday, Martin Griffiths said that the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs said that for 6 months, civilians, particularly in Khartoum, Darfur, and Kordofan, have known no respite from bloodshed and terror. He called on the parties to uphold their obligation under international humanitarian law and to honor the commitments they made in Jeddah to protect civilians and allow humanitarian aid and donors to step up their support. The International Organization for Migration in Sudan said that after half a year, the country has become the largest internal displacement crisis in the world. 7.1 million men, women, and children are displaced within Sudan's borders. 4.5 million of those have been displaced since the violence erupted mid-April, and the situation is further worsened by significant damage to infrastructure. In addition, 1.2 million people have fled neighboring countries. Since April 15th, at least 45 aid workers have been killed or detained. Almost all of them are national staff. Humanitarians are hamstrung by chronic underfunding of their humanitarian appeals, and this applies, frankly, across the board throughout the world. Turning to Chad, the humanitarian coordinator there, Violette Kakimoya, today warned that the country is facing multiple humanitarian crises and calling for urgent support. The conflict in Sudan has had a strong impact on Chad, with nearly 490,000 Sudanese refugees, mostly women and children, having crossed the border into eastern Chad to seek safety. In total, there are 1 million refugees now living in Chad. The conflict in Sudan is also impacting Chad's supply chain, with prices of basic food commodities more than doubling since the outbreak of the conflict. Chad is also vulnerable to climate change. Last year, the heaviest rain since 1960s triggered major crisis, impacting 1.4 million people and destroying 350,000 hectares of valuable farmland. Ms. Kakioma underlined the extreme generosity of the people in Chad, who continue to welcome refugees and call for support to ensure 7 million Chadians, that's out of a population of 18, receive humanitarian assistance this year. The $921 million humanitarian response plan for Chad is only 25% funded. Back here, Abdullah Batili, the Secretary General's Special Representative for Libya, spoke at the Security Council. He said that the Derna tragedy following Storm Daniel is unprecedented in Libya's recorded history. He said after recent visits to the area, human and material costs of the disaster is beyond imagination. Speaking via video conference, he noted that despite the lack of national coordination between different institutions, their individual mobilization immediately after the tragedy showed national momentum of unity inspired by the disaster. However, Mr. Batili said he's deeply concerned about the continued divisions of the leadership of Libya over the reconstruction of Derna and its surrounding affected areas. Leaders continue so far to display competition and rivalries as to which entity will exert exclusive authority over the reconstruction efforts. Moving to Ukraine, our colleagues at the Humanitarian Coordination Office say that warn that civilians are facing daily attacks along the frontline areas in the east and south of the country. In recent days, homes, schools, healthcare facilities, port infrastructure, and aid distribution points have all been hit. We, along with our humanitarian partners, continue to deliver in impacted areas. On Saturday, the humanitarian coordinator in Ukraine, Denise Brown, led a convoy carrying assistance for some 1,000 civilians in Chasiv Yar, just 6 kilometers from the front lines in the Donetsk area. Civilians are told her they've been cut off from water, electricity, and gas for more than a year. Most homes and civilian infrastructure have been damaged. 90% of the population has fled. This year, we've organized more than 90 interagency convoys to the frontline communities in northern, eastern, and southern Ukraine, with 1/3 delivering aid to the Donetsk region. We, along with our partners, have now reached more than 8.3 million people in Ukraine with humanitarian assistance this year alone. And I have a statement on the passing of Martti Ahtisaari. The Secretary General is deeply saddened to learn of the passing of Martti Ahtisaari of Finland. Mr. Ahtisaari was a distinguished statesman, a diplomat, an exemplary mediator who dedicated his life to the cause of peace. In 2008, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his determined and decades-long efforts to resolve conflicts around the world. Mr. Ahtisaari made invaluable contributions to the work of the UN, including as his special representative for Namibia, the Undersecretary General for Administration and Management, Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, and Special Envoy for the future status of Kosovo. Serving as Finland's Finland's president from 1994 to 2000, he later founded the Crisis Management Initiative, continuing his tireless actions to prevent and resolve conflicts. His remarkable life of service in pursuit of peace will always serve as an inspiration to countless UN officials who had the privilege to work with him. The Secretary General extends his heartfelt condolences to his family, to the government and people of Finland, and to everyone touched by his unwavering commitment to peace. And on a personal note, it was a privilege to having worked with him, and he truly was an inspiring leader. And just to say that, an important note, today is World Food Day. And the Secretary General, his message said, in our world of plenty, it is outrageous that a person dies of hunger every few seconds. He calls on governments, the private sector, civil society, and academia to work together to prioritize feeding the hungry. Deji.
Steph, last Saturday, the Israeli ambassador to the UN, when talking about Mr. Tor Venesland, the special coordinator for Middle East, meeting with the Iranian foreign minister, he said, and I quote, I am officially announcing the severance of my ties with Venezuela until he publicly condemns the Iranian regime of murder and terrorism. Does this affect the communication between the United Nations, especially for Mr. Tor Venesland with Israel?
Let me just say a few things. Mr. Venesland is doing exactly what he should be doing as a UN envoy. He's speaking to everyone, different parties. Some meetings we speak about, others we don't. He's keeping everyone informed. People who need to know were not surprised by the meeting. In his meetings, he is giving the same basic messages that we need humanitarian access in Gaza. We need to see the hostages released, and of course we need to avoid spillover of this conflict to the broader region. Mr. Venesland is continuing his work as we speak.
This afternoon, the Security Council is going to vote on at least one or maybe two draft resolutions on this issue. What's the expectation from the Secretariat?
The expectation is the same for us, for the Security Council, is for them to speak with one unified, strong voice for the cause of peace. That makes the Secretary General's works easier. I'll give to Margaret, then Joe, then Murad. And then I'll get to everybody.
Steph, on the UNIFIL, on the headquarters being hit in Nakura, does UNIFIL know whose artillery hit it? Was it Hezbollah or Israel's?
I don't have those details with me. We'll try
Are
to
they
get them.
investigating?
Yes, of course.
And any update at all whatsoever on, or any clarity on the Rafah crossing when it will be opened?
No, those discussions are going on at various, at many levels, but there's no progress on a full opening. It's desperately needed full opening of the crossing.
And can I just ask one on Ukraine? Qatar announced the reunification of a group of Ukrainian children that were in Russia with their families. I'm wondering if the UN or Mrs. Gamba's office has had anything to do with this.
I'll check if they had anything to do with this. It is just obviously something we very much welcome the efforts of Qatar in that regard. Joe, then Murad.
Yes, going back to the Egypt-Gaza crossing, Egypt is a signatory to the UN Refugee Convention and Protocol, and yet to date it's refused any access to the Sinai or other parts of Egypt for the Gazans who are fleeing the war and have moved south. So I'm wondering if you could tell us whether part of the discussions that have been had with Egyptian officials and perhaps might be on the agenda for Mr. Griffith's visit to Cairo coming up, is to ask the Egyptians to comply with their obligations under that convention and not only allow the humanitarian relief to move through the crossing, but to allow evacuees to also move through the crossing.
It's a very complex situation, which involves many parties, the deal with Rafah. A lot of discussions are being had at various levels. We're fully aware of what treaties and protocols and people are signatory to. We're trying to get forward movement, especially on getting the humanitarian aid that is needed. But I can assure you that everyone is fully aware of the gravity and the urgency of the situation.
Secretary General, who previously served as head of
the Secretary General
refugees,
is fully aware of the issue regarding regarding refugees.
Let me just complete my thought.
Sorry. My thought is just so wound up. But go ahead, Joe.
No, that's okay. One of the things that has been criticism has been aimed at Israel is that in telling Gazan residents in the north to move south to safer areas, that they have no place to go. But if Egypt opened up the crossing in compliance with its obligations under the convention, then that could be relieved. That would be a safety valve. So doesn't Egypt bear some of the responsibility here for the plight of the Gazans?
The international community bears a lot of responsibility. We're trying to find a solution to keep people safe, keep their dignity intact, especially for people who already are refugees, not to be displaced yet again. So we're working on all of these issues with the full knowledge of international law. Murad.
Thank you, Stéphane. I have two questions. The SCG in his statement yesterday stopped short from calling for ceasefire. How can the humanitarian aid be delivered without a ceasefire?
We want to see a stop to the violence. We're obviously speaking to all the parties to ensure that humanitarian access is granted. You're correct that we need to see, we cannot have a humanitarian access if there is fighting on the roads that we want to take, and that's what we're working on.
My second question, also in his statement last Monday, the SCG reminded Israel that military operations must be conducted in strict accordance with international humanitarian law. Now, after 1 week of bombardment in Gaza, what's your assessment? Does Israel
I think
abiding by this?
everyone could do much better at respecting international law. Sylvia, and Dawn, then Pam.
The latest SG report on resolution 1559 will be discussed tomorrow in a close consultation of the Security Council. I went through the report. Nothing new has been added. This resolution calls the disarmament of Hezbollah and other groups. The Hezbollah arsenal is stronger and more dangerous, as we can see with Gaza, with the Gaza war. How can journalists cover it? What is the relevance of this report, since the Hezbollah is turning blind eyes on this call or this resolution?
Well, I mean,
Security Council. We will be briefing the Council tomorrow.
let me get an answer on your last question. What is the point of any UN report? Is to give the latest information as we have it. The report was obviously finished and drafted before this latest round of violence that we're seeing in southern Lebanon. The Secretary General is abiding by his responsibilities according to Resolution 1701. It is up to you and to all the journalists to analyze, criticize, and say what you think about the report. But a report by the Secretary General is exactly that.
But it says nothing.
Well, I don't know if that's a question, Sylviane. I'm just saying I think it says a lot. It may not say what you want it to say, but it says a lot, and it is honest and truthful reporting according to his responsibilities given to him by the Security Council under that resolution. Dawn, then Pam.
Thanks, Steph. For a question on Syria, the recent report from the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on Syria called for an inquiry and a review to determine why the UN failed to allow, I'm quoting here, why the UN failed to allow and facilitate life-saving aid the first week after the earthquake hit Syria. Has an inquiry been initiated?
I don't know. I will check. I will check, Dawn. Sorry.
I also have a question.
Sorry.
It's the best answer. Last night, President Biden gave an interview with 60 Minutes, and he was asked about the rules of war, something to that effect. And he said that he's confident that Israel's going to act under the rules of war. And I'm just wondering what the how does the Secretary General interpret that? Because to me it sounds like that clock hasn't started ticking yet. Like there will be some line where, okay, now we can start talking, now we can start looking at war crimes. Like, aren't we already in a war? Aren't there?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think as the Secretary General said, even wars have rules, and the rules and international law is not a spigot that you turn off and on. They apply at all times. At some point, they will have to be accounting for those involved in this conflict and how they applied and whether or not they respected international law. Pam, then Ahtisaari, and then that guy in the back.
Thank you, Steph. On what's getting in and what's getting out of the Rafah crossing, there were the 6 fuel trucks that got out, in other words, out from Gaza to Egypt with a UN escort this morning.
I will ask you to hold that question for my friend Juliet.
Okay, and the water, Israel says they turned the water back on, but it isn't
Again,
flowing.
I think Juliet who's in the region, will have the latest on all of that.
All
in
right,
just about
and
40
then
minutes.
finally on the same CBS 60 Minutes interview with the president, President Biden said that he doesn't think it would be wise to occupy Gaza after an intervention. Where does the SG stand on that?
SG's against occupation, full stop. Ahtisaari.
First, follow up on that. I mean, Gaza, according to UN is still occupied.
That's correct.
The second thing, first, before I have a few follow-ups. But first, there was a Palestinian child who was 6 years old. He and his mom were stabbed, and he lost his life. And the landlord who stabbed him to death, according to news reports, were chanting Islamophobic and anti-Palestinian chants. So my question is, first of all, if you have comments, and then more importantly, in this context, we heard from many American politicians incitements against Palestinians and Arabs and Muslims in this country. What's your message to them?
I assume you're referring to the case in Chicago.
Yes.
Yes, okay. It's hard to find the words to condemn enough a crime like that, right? The horrendous, the killing of a child, the attempted killing of his mother. I think the Secretary General was very clear when he spoke on Friday that dehumanizing language incites violence should never be accepted, and he very clearly called on political leaders everywhere to speak out against anti-Muslim bigotry, to speak out against hate speech, to speak out against anti-Semitism. Social media companies also have a huge responsibility to play. They should not be in the business of spreading hate, spreading violence messages that incite people to do exactly what that man did in Chicago, and we're very glad that the suspect has been arrested.
I want to take you back to this issue of ceasefire. Francesca Albanese, the special rapporteur for the occupied Palestinian territory, tweeted and directly asked the Secretary General. She said, I'm quoting, Secretary General, please call for a ceasefire now. If not now, when? If not you, who? Your comment.
Miss Albanese is Miss Albanese, Secretary General is Secretary General. She's an independent rapporteur with the right to say, of course, what she feels she needs to say. The Secretary General's position, I think, as I've been explaining it with some challenge here for the last days, is what it is.
Which is not.
Which is to see first,
openly
we
on a
want to
ceasefire.
see an end to this violence. We want to see an end to civilians being killed sometimes in very horrendous ways. I'm going to go online, and before I come back for round two, Richard Roth left in protest. I don't know what that's about. Michelle, and then Mushfiq.
Thanks, Steph. Just a couple of follow-up questions on the same topics that my colleagues have been asking about. Yesterday, Secretary of State Blinken was talking about a mechanism to allow the aid deliveries through Rafah into Gaza. Can you elaborate a little bit on what this mechanism might look like? He said the UN's involved in those conversations.
That is
and I
correct.
have a couple more. on this.
That is correct. There will need to be a mechanism, given that it implicates a lot of parties, some of which are not on speaking terms, to put it mildly. We're working on that with key partners, but I'm not in a position to share any detail with you or any one of your colleagues at this point, Michelle.
So, what is the intention of this mechanism?
The intention is to get aid in.
Is it some sort of a monitoring mechanism?
Nice try.
Okay. On the delay in getting aid in through that crossing, Egypt is blaming Israel for airstrikes in the area, saying that the crossing is technically open, but because of the airstrikes, no one can go through. What's the UN assessment?
UN assessment is that there's currently a war going on, and it's making it very difficult for us to reach our goal.
And while the SG is in China, will he meet with the Russian president?
If there are any other meetings, we will let you know. Mushfiq.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Stéphane?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Very quick question. European Union and United States expressed their dissatisfaction on Bangladesh electoral environment, and the EU already declared that they will not observe the upcoming election in Bangladesh, and US pre-election assessment team urged for dialogue between the ruling party and opposition. Current regime attacking on opposition by all means, according to Voice of America English
What-
Service report.
Mushfiq, sorry, what is the question you want to ask me?
Yeah, my question is, we have the US position, European Union position. So what is the UN latest position on Bangladesh in this current oppressed situation?
Our position has not changed, that we want to see free and fair elections in Bangladesh in a climate where people can speak out without fear of retribution from whichever side they speak out. And also, just to point out that the UN is not in the business of observing elections unless it receives a mandate. Joe, Dulcie, and then we'll go to our guest in Kabul, who's been very patient.
Okay, I'm going to try to make this quick, but it is a pointed question. Did
I
I
expect
understand?
nothing less from you, Joe.
Well, I don't want to, disappoint you. Did I understand you correctly to say that the UN's position is that even after Israel withdrew all soldiers and settlers from Gaza in 2005, let's say up to where we are today. Wait.
Yeah.
Up to where we are today, that the UN still considers Gaza to
Our
be
position,
occupied by Israel?
As position has not changed, given a body of international law framework.
Well,
I
then,
will leave it-
can you then explain how it happened that if Gaza is occupied, as you say, still by Israel, that Hamas has been able to launch these terrorist attacks?
I'm not able to explain the actions of Hamas. Dulcie.
You may have said this earlier, but does the Secretary General support an immediate ceasefire in Gaza?
What we support is an end to the ongoing violence.
But why doesn't he use the word ceasefire? Is there a legal reason?
We're using the words that we are using at this time. When those words change, you will know.
But I would like an explanation because it doesn't make sense.
Well, then up to you to explain it to your readers. I can only explain it as best as I can, which clearly is not very well. We will now go to our guest in Kabul, and I will leave you in Shireen's hands. What? Better hands. Yes, better hands.